It is 4:52 in the morning on a Thursday in October, and the Central Valley fog sits so low over the fields outside Fresno, California, that the headlights of the lead Bearcat G3 armored vehicle cut maybe 40 feet before the white disappears everything. The column has been staged 2 miles east on a farm access road for the last 90 minutes. 12 vehicles, 41 agents and task force officers from the Drug Enforcement Administration and Homeland Security Investigations. 3 entry teams, 1 warrant. The target is a food processing facility on the western edge of Fresno County, a hulling and dehydrating plant built in the early 1980s to process the almond harvest from the surrounding cooperative farms. According to 14 months of state filings, the facility is closed, padlocked, dormant. The cooperative reported zero output for the last 5 consecutive quarters. The county assessor listed it as inactive. The State Agriculture Board had it flagged for a routine permit renewal that nobody bothered to complete, because why would you, for a plant with nothing running inside it? At 4:54 a.m., the lead Bearcat rolls past the outer fence. The thermal camera mounted to the vehicle's roof reads the temperature of the main processing building's exterior wall at 61 degrees Fahrenheit. In October, before sunrise, in the San Joaquin Valley, the ambient air temperature is 43 degrees. That wall is 18 degrees warmer than the air around it. Something inside that building has been running all night. The entry teams pull to the loading dock. The battering ram team moves to the main roll door. And from 60 yards away, even through the fog, the lead agent on the HSI tactical element can hear it. The low, continuous hum of industrial dehydrating equipment. The kind of hum that uses 40,000 gallons of water a day. The plant that was supposed to be closed is wide awake. Here is what's most surprising about this case, and I mean this genuinely. It was not a wiretap that broke it open. It was not a confidential informant. It was not a surveillance team or a satellite image or a financial forensics unit. The thread that unraveled $94 million in laundered drug proceeds, 2.3 tons of methamphetamine, and a criminal network spread across 4 states started with a water bill. One junior analyst, working a desk at the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit in Sacramento, was running a cross-reference audit in the spring of the prior year, a routine data match between utility consumption records filed with the state's Agricultural Water Authority and the tax filings submitted by agricultural processing cooperatives in the Central Valley. The work was unglamorous. It was the kind of task that gets handed to analysts who are new, because the data is dense and the results are usually nothing. Except this time, one line didn't match. A processing facility registered under a cooperative holding company, call it Cresthaven Agricultural Partners for the purposes of this account, had filed a zero-output tax return for the prior fiscal year. No revenue, no production, no employee payroll. A dormant facility, according to every document it had submitted to every state and federal agency that asked. But the Fresno County Water Authority showed that the same facility's utility account had drawn 42,000 gallons of water per day, every day, for 14 consecutive months. The analyst flagged it, a supervisor reviewed it, and then, because the number was anomalous enough and the discrepancy large enough, it went to a joint task force referral, DEA's Fresno resident office, and the HSI field office in Sacramento. That referral landed on a Tuesday morning. By Friday afternoon, agents had pulled satellite imagery of the facility, going back 2 years, cross-referenced truck traffic visible in the imagery against commercial freight manifests filed with the California Highway Patrol's weight station logs, and identified something that should not have been possible. Pallets of finished product were leaving that facility. A lot of them. This is how the investigation actually began. The case file, which we spent considerable time working through because the operational detail here is extraordinary, opens on a formal date of May 9th of the prior year, when DEA's Fresno resident office opened what would become Operation Dry Harvest. The lead case agent, a 10-year DEA veteran we'll identify as Special Agent Reyes, wrote in the opening case summary that the water consumption anomaly represented, quote, a level of operational risk that suggests either a significant misuse of the facility or active criminal enterprise at scale. She was understating it. The first 6 weeks of the investigation were methodical and quiet. Reyes and her HSI counterpart, a senior special agent we'll call Navarro, requested and received access to the facility's commercial freight records through a grand jury subpoena. What came back took them 4 days to fully process. Over the preceding 14 months, freight manifests showed that a total of 217 refrigerated semi-trailer loads had departed the Cresthaven facility, all listed as agricultural product, specifically processed almonds in food-grade packaging. The destination coordinates varied: a cold storage depot outside Stockton, a distribution warehouse in Phoenix, a food cooperative facility in Memphis, and a wholesale grocery consolidation hub in Denver. The weight of those loads, however, did not match what the facility claimed to be producing. Not even close. The trailers were leaving heavier than they should have been for the volume of almonds declared, consistently heavier, by between 4 and 9% per load. 4 to 9% sounds small. Across 217 loads of refrigerated semi-trailer freight, it represents a significant mass of undeclared material pressed into food-grade packaging, moving through legitimate agricultural freight channels, arriving at destinations that, on paper, had nothing to do with each other. What strikes us about this phase of the investigation is the audacity of the concealment method. This was not a crude operation. Whoever designed this understood agricultural supply chain logistics well enough to exploit the specific gaps that make food-grade freight nearly impossible to audit at scale. The FDA does not inspect every pallet. The DEA does not have the staffing to run spectrometer checks on refrigerated almond shipments. The system trusted the manifests because the manifests looked right. The system was wrong. By week 8 of the investigation, Reyes and Navarro had enough to go to the United States Attorney's Office in Fresno for a Title III wiretap application, the federal authorization for electronic surveillance of specific telephone lines. The application named 3 telephone numbers: the dispatch line for the Cresthaven facility, a mobile number registered to a logistics coordinator associated with one of the shell companies in the cooperative structure, and a landline at a commercial office suite in Fresno that served as the registered address for 2 of the 7 shell agricultural firms that would ultimately be named in the indictment. The Title III application was approved on July 14th. Within 72 hours, the first intercept gave the investigation something it had not yet had: a name. The name was not the person running the facility. It was not the logistics coordinator. It was a figure referred to consistently in intercepted calls as the accountant, a person who appeared to be managing the movement of proceeds through the shell company structure. The calls were brief, professional, and almost entirely free of explicit language, the kind of discipline you see in organizations that have been operating long enough to understand telephone security. But the patterns were there. The timing of calls correlated with departure windows for the freight loads. The references to inventory reconciliation and co-op distributions tracked against the financial flows that the IRS analyst had already flagged. I spent a significant amount of time going through the timeline of intercepts in this case, and one detail kept coming back. The discipline of these calls was remarkable, but it also revealed something about the organization's structure. The accountant never spoke directly to the facility. There was always an intermediary. That intermediary was the key. Put yourself in Special Agent Reyes's position at this point in the investigation. Week 12, mid-August, Central Valley heat sitting at 104 degrees. You have wiretap intercepts, freight weight discrepancies, utility records, and satellite imagery. What you do not have is a single piece of the actual product. You have never seen the methamphetamine. You have never been inside the facility. Every piece of evidence you have is circumstantial, inferential, and dependent on a jury eventually agreeing that the pattern means what you think it means. That is not an arrest warrant, not yet. What you need is someone on the inside. The confidential informant, identified in case documents only as CS1, was developed through a separate DEA investigation that had been running in the Fresno area for the prior 8 months. CS1 had peripheral ties to one of the logistics networks that appeared in the freight manifests, and when approached by DEA, agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration on a pending federal charge. The informant had no direct knowledge of the Cresthaven operation, but they had a credible employment background in agricultural processing, and they had the right contacts to make a job application at the facility look organic. It took 3 weeks to build the cover. DEA backstopped a work history, established a clean identity consistent with CS1's actual skills, and coordinated with a legitimate agricultural staffing agency to place the informant as a night shift equipment operator. The application went in on September 4th. The callback came September 11th. CS1 started work September 18th. The first shift report came back the following morning. The facility was running 3 production lines simultaneously, 24 hours a day in 2 shifts. The dehydrating units were processing material that was not almonds. The conveyor belts were carrying sealed food-grade packages from a secondary processing area at the rear of the building, an area that did not appear on the facility's original construction permits and had been added at some point in the last several years without any county building inspection filing. The packages were being palletized on the standard almond shipping format and loaded directly onto refrigerated trailers at the loading dock. CS1 estimated, based on the production rate observed in the first shift, that the facility was pressing and packaging methamphetamine at a rate of approximately 400 to 600 kilograms per week. Reyes and Navarro spent 48 hours rerunning their freight weight calculations against that estimate. The numbers aligned almost exactly. They had been watching several tons of methamphetamine move through California's agricultural freight system for over a year, disguised as food. The case was now, in the language of the DEA's operational planning framework, a Title III investigation with corroborating human intelligence and a live source inside the target location. What it needed before a tactical entry could be authorized was a set of controlled observations that would satisfy the probable cause threshold for a search warrant, and an identification of the full distribution network so that simultaneous arrests could be executed before any defendant had the opportunity to destroy evidence or flee. That last requirement is where the next obstacle came in, and it nearly ended the investigation. In the 3rd week of October, the intermediary figure who had been appearing in the Title III intercepts, the person Reyes's team had identified as the link between the accountant and the facility, stopped using the monitored phone number. Completely. The number went dark on October 19th. No calls in, no calls out. The line was simply abandoned. This was not, in federal drug investigations, an unusual occurrence. Organizations that practice telephone discipline will periodically cycle numbers as a routine security measure, but the timing was concerning. The investigation was now 19 months in. The entry team had been briefed, and the tactical planning was at an advanced stage. If the organization had detected the investigation, even partially, even through no specific compromise, the window for a clean arrest of the full network could close very quickly. Reyes convened an emergency operational meeting on October 21st. The options were accelerate the timeline and execute before the network could further disperse, or maintain patience and attempt to re-establish coverage on the intermediary through alternative means. The decision, made in consultation with the U.S. Attorney's Office, was to accelerate, but only by 72 hours, to allow for final warrant preparation and the coordination of arrest teams in all 4 target states. The entry date was moved from the originally planned November 3rd to October 31st, and then, 20 minutes before the final tactical briefing on the evening of October 30th, CS1 went silent. The informant missed the scheduled check-in call at 9 p.m., then the 9:30 backup contact. Then the emergency text protocol at 10 p.m. drew no response. For 2 hours and 17 minutes, the person who was inside that building was unreachable, and no one in the operations center knew why. Reyes made the call at 12:19 a.m. on October 31st. The operation would proceed as planned. At 4 a.m., the tactical column would stage. At 4:52 a.m., they would move. CS1 sent a single coded message at 12:44 a.m. The informant was safe. The phone had died, and a charger had not been available until after the shift ended. The facility was operating normally. The night shift was on. The dehydrators were running. The operation was a go. Here is the part of this story that does not sit comfortably, even looking back at it from the resolution side. The cooperative model that Cresthaven exploited was not a novel vulnerability that the organization invented. It is a structural feature of how American agricultural commerce is regulated, or more precisely, how it is not regulated. Cooperative agricultural processing facilities operate under a patchwork of state and federal oversight that prioritizes the efficiency of food supply chain movement over the kind of transactional audit that would catch what was happening at this plant. Nobody at the FDA, the USDA, the State Agriculture Board, or the county assessor had the statutory mandate, the staffing, or the data integration to cross-reference a facility's water consumption against its declared output and ask why the numbers didn't match. One junior IRS analyst did it by accident, as a sidebar to a routine data matching exercise that had nothing to do with agricultural fraud. Unpopular opinion. The fact that this took a data accident to surface is not a DEA failure. it is a legislative one. The agencies that are supposed to audit agricultural commerce do not have the tools to do it. And the organizations that do have those tools, like the IRS and the financial intelligence units, are not structurally connected to agricultural oversight in any routine way. The network in this case operated successfully for at minimum 14 months, and possibly longer, because the regulatory seams between agriculture, finance, and drug enforcement were wide enough to run an industrial methamphetamine operation through. That is a policy problem, and nobody in any of the relevant oversight committees has proposed a serious solution to it. Back to October 31st, and the column moving through the fog. At 4:56 a.m., the battering ram team makes contact with the main roll door of the Cresthaven facility's loading dock. The first strike deforms the lower rail. The second strike opens a gap. The third strike takes the door off its track, and the entry team is inside. The warrant execution team follows 30 seconds behind. The facility interior is exactly what CS1 described. 3 production lines. Conveyor belts moving sealed packages from the rear processing area to the staging floor near the loading dock. The dehydrating units are running at full capacity. The heat inside the building is, according to the entry team's documentation, approximately 89 degrees Fahrenheit. The smell is chemical, industrial. The night shift workers, 11 individuals present at the time of entry, are directed to the ground by HSI tactical officers at 4:57 a.m. and are in plastic flex cuffs by 5:03 a.m. None resist. 2 attempt to move toward a secondary exit on the south wall and are intercepted by the containment team that had been positioned there since 4:45 a.m. The rear processing area is secured at 5:09 a.m. What agents find there is, in the words of the HSI special agent who documented the scene, a fully operational pharmaceutical-grade pressing and packaging facility, concealed within the existing structure of the almond processing plant, using modified food-grade equipment. The equipment includes industrial pill presses, mixing units, a heat-sealing line for the food-grade packaging, and a quality control station with a scale accurate to 1 gram. The DEA Evidence Response Team begins systematic documentation at 5:18 a.m. At 5:41 a.m., a K9 unit alerts on the concrete floor of a storage room adjacent to the main processing area. An agent marks the location. A structural engineer contracted to the task force, brought in specifically because CS1 had mentioned, in one of the final check-in reports, that workers were directed away from a particular section of the storage room floor for no apparent reason, examines the marked area. She identifies a hairline seam in the concrete, approximately 4 feet by 3 feet, that is inconsistent with the original pour pattern of the floor. A hydraulic floor jack is brought in at 5:58 a.m. The vault opens at 6:04 a.m. What is inside? $11,400,000 in United States currency, bundled in standard bank strap denominations of $10,000 per bundle. 114 bundles. The bundles are sealed in commercial vacuum bags. The bags are stacked in 5 layers. The vault is 18 inches deep, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet long, and it has been there long enough that the concrete poured over the seam has cured to a hardness indistinguishable from the surrounding floor. At 6:22 a.m., the first of the coordinated arrest teams in Stockton executes a warrant at the cold storage depot that had been receiving Cresthaven freight. At 6:31 a.m., Phoenix. At 6:44 a.m., Memphis. At 6:49 a.m., Denver. And simultaneously, arrest teams move on the commercial office suite in Fresno, the registered addresses of the shell companies, and the residential addresses of 7 individuals named in sealed arrest warrants. The accountant is arrested at 7:02 a.m. at a residence in the Clovis suburb northeast of Fresno. There is no resistance. The arrest is made at the front door, in a bathrobe, in the company of a cup of coffee that is, according to the arresting agent's report, still hot. The intermediary, the figure who had gone dark on the telephone on October 19th, is located at a hotel in Bakersfield. Arrested at 7:17 a.m., cash present in the hotel room, $46,000 in a rolling suitcase. By 9 o'clock on the morning of October 31st, the operation that would become known in the court filings as Operation Dry Harvest has resulted in the arrest of 26 individuals across 4 states, with 5 additional defendants taken into custody over the following 72 hours through international coordination and fugitive apprehension by U.S. Marshals, bringing the total indicted count to 31. The charges span federal drug trafficking under Title 21, money laundering under Title 18, conspiracy, and in several cases, structuring. The crime of deliberately breaking financial transactions into amounts below the federal reporting threshold to avoid detection. The indictment names 7 Shell agricultural companies as criminal enterprises under RICO. The seizures, when fully inventoried, come to 2.3 tons of methamphetamine, recovered from the facility, the 4 distribution points, and 2 intermediary storage locations identified through the coordinated warrants, $11.4 million in currency from the floor vault, an additional $2.9 million recovered from the hotel room, the accountant's residence, and the registered offices of the Shell companies, 4 vehicles, and financial accounts across 9 banks that, when frozen by court order, held balances totaling approximately $6.2 million. The financial investigation, running parallel to the criminal prosecution, identified the full scope of the laundering operation through forensic accounting work conducted by the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit and FinCEN. The 7 Shell agricultural companies had, over a period of approximately 3 years, moved money through cooperative distribution accounts, commodity futures positions, equipment lease arrangements, and agricultural export contracts in a pattern designed to generate legitimate-appearing revenue that would obscure the origin of drug proceeds. The total amount identified as laundered or in process of laundering at the time of the investigation's conclusion, $94 million. The mechanism that made the laundering work was the cooperative accounting structure itself. Agricultural cooperatives distribute proceeds to member farmers based on declared production volumes. If a cooperative falsely inflates its production records and funnels drug money into the distribution pool, the payouts to member accounts look, from the outside, like legitimate agricultural income. Members who knew nothing about the operation were receiving payments sourced, in part, from methamphetamine sales. Members who did know, and 3 individuals named in the indictment are charged with knowing participation in the laundering scheme, used those payments to further obscure the money trail. The court transcripts run over 4,000 pages. But there is a single footnote in the financial forensics appendix to the indictment that stays with me. It notes that the water consumption anomaly that triggered the original referral represented less than 0.3% of the data reviewed in the IRS analyst's cross-reference audit. The entire case that followed, 19 months, 41 agents on the entry team alone, 31 indictments, $94 million in laundered proceeds identified, grew from a number that was 1 line out of thousands, on a screen, on a Tuesday morning, that one analyst decided was worth a second look. What does the cooperative model that enabled this look like from the inside of the system right now, after the plant is sealed and the indictments are filed? It looks, frankly, like every other legitimate agricultural cooperative in the Central Valley. The utility cross-reference audit that caught the Cresthaven facility was not a standing program. It was an ad hoc exercise by a single analyst. It has not been institutionalized. The IRS, the USDA, and the state agriculture boards do not currently have an integrated data-sharing framework that would flag the kind of consumption versus output discrepancy that opened this case. We track what comes next. Subscribe to the Bureau files so the next case finds you first. The 31 defendants face sentencing on a schedule that extends across the next 18 to 24 months of federal court proceedings. The most serious charges carry mandatory minimum sentences of 10 years. The leading figures face potential terms of 25 years or more under the federal drug trafficking statutes. The Shell companies have been dissolved by court order. The Cresthaven facility itself has been seized by the government under civil asset forfeiture and padlocked, genuinely, this time. And the 40,000-gallon-per-day water account has been terminated. One more thing worth sitting with. Do you think the cooperative loophole that made this possible would have stayed hidden without that one data matching accident? Or do you think someone, somewhere, would eventually have noticed? Comment below, because the answer to that question matters more than the arrest count. The floor vault is sealed now. The dehydrators are cold. The fog burns off the Central Valley by mid-morning most days. And the almond groves stretch out flat in every direction. Quiet and orderly and unremarkable. But the water bills are still being filed. Somewhere, on a spreadsheet that nobody is cross-referencing tonight, there is a number that doesn't match. A dormant facility drawing power, or water, or freight capacity that a zero-output filing says it shouldn't need. The analyst who would notice it is probably working on something else. The question is not whether there are more warm dehydrators running behind a silent tax return, The question is who, right now, is actually counting the water?